Just remind you, President Trump ran on no new foreign wars of regime change. So I hope the folks who voted for President Trump expecting that are looking harder at this moment and at what Congress should be doing to rein in the scope of this war and this military
meetings. Elena, thank you so much for that. Here with me now is a Democratic member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, thank you so much for being here. Iran's supreme leader is now dead. We've seen videos of Iranians celebrating in the streets. Put aside your opposition to how these strikes were carried out. The elimination of the Ayatollah, is that a good thing for America?
Absolutely, Dana. Look, Ayatollah Khamenei was the longest serving and among the most brutal dictators in the world. He had the blood of many Americans on his hands, from the attack on Khobar Towers in Saudi to the attack on the Marine barracks in Beirut to the killing of many American service members in Iraq. The Iranian regime has been the greatest exporter of terror in the region, and I will not grieve for one moment the passing of the supreme leader of Iran, and frankly, the success in taking out many of the leaders of the IRGC. My concern is that Iran has three main weapons. They've got ballistic missiles and drones, and they've launched many at our allies and partners in the region, as well as at our service members and bases. They've got cyber capabilities, and they've got terrorist capabilities around the world. And so today, I am praying for our service members, our diplomats, our civilians in the region, for all of our partners and the civilians in the region, and hope that our national security apparatus is as prepared as it can be for attacks anywhere in the world against the United States and our interests, as Iran seeks to strike back for our success in taking out one of the most brutal dictators in the region.
You think that's going to happen in a way that's more robust than what we have seen so far?
Well, I think the Iranian regime has its back to the wall. And I think, unlike the 12-day war last year, where they de-escalated relatively quickly, they see the killing of their national leader and the scope and breadth of the strikes against Iran and President Trump declaring a full-scale war to achieve regime change as the moment, I believe, where they need to throw everything they've got against us. That's why they're attacking civilian targets in countries in the region. Dana, I spent yesterday afternoon calling the ambassadors to the U.S. from Jordan, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, just to express support and to thank them for standing by us. They're receiving attacks from drones and missiles, and in some cases, they're hitting civilian infrastructure, like the Fairmont Hotel in Dubai. And this is causing real alarm by our allies in the region. They need to know that we have their back.
In the wake of the initial strikes on Iran, you said this is not how a democracy goes to war. And I want to ask you about that, because you well know that senators in both parties have been all too willing over the past, 2+ decades, even more, to give Democratic and Republican presidents a lot of leeway in using military action overseas how they see fit without Congress weighing in.
That's right. And one of our challenges is getting correct the balance between scope and means for a war. In this case, President Trump has launched a war of very large goals: regime change, ending a nuclear enrichment program, eliminating all of their ballistic missiles, but with limited means. As far as we've heard so far, only attacks by the air, by missiles and by airstrikes. There's no example I know of in modern history where regime change has happened solely through airstrikes. And I hope and pray we won't see American boots on the ground in Iran. Iran is dramatically different than either Iraq or Venezuela. It is 4 times larger than Iraq, has double the population, has a regime that's been in place nearly 50 years, and that is incredibly repressive domestically. It lacks some of the internal divisions and the mobilized opposition that existed both in Venezuela and in Iraq. In Venezuela, many of the military and intelligence services actually speak English and trained with the United States before Chavez came into power. So we were able to actually remove the leader and have almost immediate negotiations with potentially partners and compliant members of the Venezuelan leadership. That's not going to happen in Iran. This is going to be much tougher, and the consequences are much more unpredictable. And last, I'll just remind you, President Trump ran on no new foreign wars of regime change. So I hope the folks who voted for President Trump expecting that are looking harder at this moment and at what Congress should be doing to rein in the scope of this war and this military adventure.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you noted at the beginning of that answer that you don't remember any example of successful regime change with military action solely from the sky and not ground troops. Are you suggesting that maybe there could be ground troops as long as Congress authorizes it? Or are you saying that perhaps regime change isn't realistic when it comes to the goals?
I think regime change is a very ambitious goal here. I wish that were not true. I would like to see a successful uprising. And obviously, the murder of thousands of innocent Iranians who were protesting the regime is just one of the most recent of the horrible actions of the Iranian regime. But the most recent example we could both point to is the air campaign against Gaddafi that produced chaos in Libya for years. There is one hopeful recent example in Syria, where a seemingly stable repressive regime was overthrown relatively quickly, but that was by an armed, organized opposition. In Iran, it's not at all clear to me how regime change will happen. My fear is that by opening this new chapter, by choosing the path of war when diplomacy was still within reach, that what Trump will cause is a more repressive, more aggressive Iranian regime, that the IRGC will massacre more of its civilians, and that they will be more aggressive in the region. I hope that is not the case, but that is the concern that animates my expression of opposition to this war at this time with this scale and scope.
Well, you say that diplomacy was happening and some kind of deal was within reach, but you well know that a lot of the president's allies were pushing him to go ahead with these strikes because it wasn't just the nuclear program, that this is a moment of strategic weakness for Iran, economically, militarily, and also because of the protests, even though the tens of thousands were killed, there is more unrest, civilian unrest, at least publicly, than we have seen in a very long time. So given that, I know you don't support the notion of doing this, how the president did it, but do you understand why?
Yes, I can understand the president taking a bold gamble, but I disagree with this gamble at this moment, because I do think, according to the Omani foreign minister, that the Iranian regime, the weakest it's been in years, was actually making real concessions. And I did support the JCPOA, the agreement negotiated under Obama that got inspectors into every aspect of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. I think it was possible to achieve, through diplomacy and intense pressure aligned with our allies, to get Iran to finally stop its support for terrorism in the region, to rein in its ballistic missile program, and to stop its nuclear enrichment program. I at least think that should have been given more of a chance before we launched a broad spectrum war. As it is, I understand, given how weak this very dangerous and terrorist regime is at the moment, that President Trump decided to take the path of war. But in a democracy, a war of this scale should not happen without congressional approval.
Senator Chris Coons, thank you so much for being here this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, as the Mideast face.
Moments ago on live television, Senator Chris Coons looked into the camera and delivered a statement that will echo far beyond the studio walls. When asked whether the elimination of Iran's supreme leader was a good thing for America, he answered without hesitation. Absolutely. He described the Ayatollah as one of the longest-serving and most brutal dictators in the world. He said he would not grieve for a single moment. And yet, in the same breath, he warned that what comes next may be far more dangerous than what just ended. This is the contradiction at the heart of power. The removal of a tyrant can feel like justice, but justice without a strategy can become instability. Coons did not celebrate recklessly. He acknowledged Iran's history of aggression in the region. He referenced attacks against American service members and U.S. interests. He noted the role of the regime as a destabilizing force for decades. In that sense, his words reflected a bipartisan truth. Few in Washington will mourn the passing of a regime leader long accused of repression and violence. But then came the pivot. Iran, he reminded viewers, still possesses ballistic missiles, drone capabilities, cyber tools, and global networks capable of retaliation. He spoke of ambassadors calling in fear. He described regional allies absorbing strikes on civilian infrastructure. He prayed for American service members, diplomats, and civilians. His tone shifted from certainty to caution. And that shift reveals something profound about this moment in American history. For decades, Washington has wrestled with the balance between moral outrage and constitutional restraint. Senator Coons made clear that while he sees the removal of the Ayatollah as beneficial, he questions the path taken to get there. This is not how a democracy goes to war, he said earlier. In those words lies a deeper debate, not about Iran, but about America. Who decides when a nation enters a conflict of this magnitude? Is it the executive alone, or must Congress reclaim its constitutional role in authorizing war? President Trump, according to Coons, has launched a campaign with sweeping goals: regime change, dismantling nuclear ambitions, eliminating missile programs. These are not minor objectives. They are historic undertakings. And history shows that such ambitions rarely succeed through air power alone. Coons warned that Iran is not Iraq, not Libya, not Venezuela. It is larger, more entrenched, more internally consolidated. Nearly 5 decades of regime control have hardened its institutions. The opposition inside the country, though courageous, is fragmented. There is no clear successor waiting in the wings, no ready made transition. And so we arrive at a dangerous crossroads. On one side stands the argument of opportunity. Iran, weakened economically and politically, presented what some called a strategic opening. Protests had shaken the streets. Internal fractures were visible. Some allies of the president argued that decisive action now could reshape the Middle East for a generation. On the other side stands the argument of restraint. Coons cited diplomacy that he believed was still within reach. He referenced negotiations facilitated through Oman. He pointed to the previous nuclear agreement under President Obama that placed inspectors inside Iran's program. He argued that pressure aligned with allies might have secured concessions without igniting a broader conflict. This is not merely a policy disagreement, it is a philosophical one. What is the role of America in a volatile world? Is strength defined by swift military action or by disciplined patience? Does the removal of a hostile leader bring freedom closer or chaos nearer? Even as he acknowledged the brutality of the Iranian regime, Coons expressed fear that war could produce unintended consequences. A regime with its back against the wall may respond with escalation. Internal repression could intensify. Regional instability could spread. The very act meant to weaken the regime could consolidate its most hardline elements. These are not abstract concerns. They are lessons written across decades of foreign policy. And yet, there is also moral weight in confronting aggression. Few Americans will dispute that Iran's leadership engaged in actions hostile to U.S. interests. Few will argue that the region has not suffered under its shadow. The question is not whether the regime was dangerous. The question is whether this path forward strengthens or strains the American system. Coons ended with a reminder that President Trump campaigned on avoiding new foreign wars. Voters heard that promise. Now they watch events unfold. In a democracy, leaders are accountable not only for their decisions, but for their consistency. The death of a supreme leader marks the end of an era, but it does not automatically mark the beginning of peace. What we witnessed today was more than a television interview. It was a snapshot of a nation grappling with its identity. Justice versus procedure, power versus principle, decisiveness versus deliberation. America stands at a defining moment. Will Congress reassert its constitutional authority? Will diplomacy re-enter the conversation? Will this conflict expand or stabilize? History is watching. Our allies are watching. Our adversaries are watching. And the American people must watch too. Because in the end, the strength of this republic does not rest solely on missiles or strikes from the sky. It rests on accountability, on constitutional balance, on informed citizens who demand clarity from those who wield power in their name. This moment will shape the next chapter of American leadership. Stay informed, stay vigilant. And if you believe in holding power to account and exposing the deeper truth behind the headlines, subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work. Support our